Hi, Wache. My name's Jules Koostachin. I'm Cree from Attawapiskat First Nation in Northern Ontario, and I'm based here in Vancouver. So before I tell you a little bit about myself, I want to say InNiNeWak to ArtsCan Circle and their online platform called ArtsCan Connects, which is dedicated to connecting artists with Northern youth. So InNiNeWak for inviting me to share my story with you all today. I was inspired to tell stories, I think, at a young age. I was raised with my Cree grandparents up in Moosonee and my mother, who's a residential school survivor. My grandparents did not speak English. They spoke InNiNeWak, and they were both hunter-trappers. My grandfather was a leader in the community, and what I loved about him was that, you know, when he was younger, he would take people out into the bush and teach them how to be self-sustaining. So he would teach them how to support themselves and sustain themselves. So that was really important to him as a person. And so I was raised with these two incredible people, as well as my mom. She's a residential school warrior. She went to St. Anne's Residential School at the age of 5 and then returned home at the age of 16. So she spent much of her life, or young life, in residential school. I remember listening to her stories as a child, like her haunting stories, and not fully understanding why no one was talking about it at school. And, you know, I was always bothered because her stories were so terrible. And I thought, why isn't anyone doing anything about this? Why are Indigenous people being treated this way? I remember being confused by her stories, but they were always so vivid and always so haunting. But on the other side, I remember being around my grandparents and my cousins and my aunties, and everybody would come over and we would tell stories and tell jokes and just gossip, you know, just get together and laugh. I remember my face being sore after laughing all day, you know, listening to them. So I think, you know, since I can remember, I've always been around storytellers. So it was very natural for me to become a storyteller because I was raised with my grandparents up in Northern Ontario. So I was surrounded by storytellers my whole life. And I think this is what has inspired me to become a storyteller myself. So I make documentary film. I'm also here in Vancouver at UBC finishing up my PhD in Indigenous documentary. I'm really fascinated and interested in our relationship to story. I think that story carries agency, meaning that story has life, and story has the power to change perspective. Story can change the way that you do things in your life, you know. So I think it's important as Indigenous storytellers to position ourselves and to talk about our relationship to the stories we're sharing or about to share with a larger audience. I make documentary film for youth, for young people, because I'm a parent. I have 4 sons. My oldest is Asavak, and then I have Mohegan, and then I have twin boys, Tapwewin and Pawakan. And I remember when my older boys were young, I remember being frustrated because there was nothing really on TV or available for them, you know, that was positive about Indigenous life. I took it upon myself to produce something for Indigenous youth. Hence my TV series, ASCII Boys, was born. But before I get into, you know, the work that I do, I wanted to share that as a young person, I was labeled with a learning disability. I spent much of my younger years with a hearing impairment. I had surgery when I was 16, but before that, I wasn't able to kind of follow what was going on in the classroom. Sounds were muffled, voices were muffled, so I didn't really know what was happening. So I'd spend a lot of my time in the classroom kind of just doing my own thing in my imaginary world. I spent a lot of time by myself in my room playing, just creating other worlds for myself to kind of go and venture into. For me, storytelling is a way out of the chaos sometimes. I know right now we're in chaotic times. We're all living through this pandemic collectively together, and I know it's super stressful. I have twin boys who'll be turning 14 very soon. And I've been in the house with them for the last, I don't even know how many months. And I know it's getting to them as well. They're young and they should be out there socializing with their friends and, you know, just doing what teenagers do. But they've been kind of stuck in the house with me, with mom. And I've been stressed out as well. Like even as an adult, you know, I'm a little bit worried about what the future holds. So I can just imagine how difficult it is for my sons and, you know, how hard it is for them to make sense of the world. But I am hopeful. No, things are changing for the better here in Canada. And what I do in terms of self-care is I try to take walks every day. I live here on campus at UBC here in Vancouver, so I'm near the ocean, and I live near this beautiful forest, as you can see around me. And I feel like when I take a break and go for a walk, that I'm allowing myself to heal, to catch my breath, to reflect on what's happening in the world. I give my kids a break from me and I take a break from them. And I try to reach out when I'm feeling overwhelmed. So I really hope that when you're feeling stressed or uncertain, that you reach out. There's a lot of really amazing programs out there and call-in centers, texting services. There's so many places that you can reach out to if you're feeling uncertain about what is happening right now in the world. You're not alone. We're all in this together. So it's important, like I said, to reach out. So when I think about gender, being a woman in this industry, in the film industry, I think about, you know, the perspective that I'm offering, you know, in terms of stories that may be important to women, or gender doesn't necessarily come into play with my work. I just do what feels right for me, and I work with stories that have meaning. I pitched an idea while I was in graduate school. I was doing my master's at Ryerson University in Toronto, and I remember sitting in class and I had this great idea for a series, and I pitched it, and the professor said, there's no audience for that. There's no audience for that kind of story. And ASCII Boys was really about my two older sons going out on the land and receiving their teachings. And I was sad because my grandparents passed away before taking them out on the land. And so I thought, what other ways can I get this to happen? So I thought of a TV series. And because as a parent, I was super frustrated that kids weren't seeing themselves on screen in a positive light, that maybe I could offer something for Indigenous youth to engage with. Like I said, I pitched the story in the classroom and my professor shot it down. And then I thought, no, I know there's a void. I definitely know that we need to see ourselves represented on screen in a positive way. So I went to APTN, Aboriginal People's Television Network, and I pitched it to them. And later that year, we were in production. So ASCII Boys is now airing on APTN. And it's a show that was inspired by my love for my grandparents. It's unfortunate that my grandparents weren't able to take my boys out on the land. So I thought, what other way can I make this happen? And so we visited 13 different Native communities in Ontario and Quebec. And my kids now have family all over the place, and they can go visit there and be safe. And when we visited these 13 different communities, I made sure that my children understood that they needed to gift the community knowledge keeper or elder with something that had meaning. So at the beginning of every show, my kids offered tobacco, or they gave a gift that they chose. So, you know, there was an exchange. Reciprocity is the word, reciprocity. So my kids understood that if they were going to go into a Native community and be gifted with story and teachings and ceremony sometimes, that they needed to give back. It didn't have to be money, or it didn't have to be a big gift. We're always, you know, thinking of creative ways to give to a knowledge keeper or an elder in the community. Recently, I've worked on a CBC short doc called Kayameta, Sharing Truths About Menopause. That was a passion project because it was a very personal story. And I brought a whole bunch of aunties together and we shared stories about our experiences of menopause because it's such a taboo topic. That was inspired by my own experiences with not feeling heard when I went to the doctors. And I have 2 other documentaries that I did with CBC. The first one that I did is called NiSoTewak, 2 Bodies, 1 Heart, because I'm a parent to identical twins, about my twins' understanding of who they are as Cree twins. So they explore identity, they explore being twins. And also what's fascinating about that documentary is I let them prepare their own questions. So I didn't have a say in terms of what they were going to ask their parents, myself and my partner, or their older brothers. So that was something that when we were in production and studio recording, none of us knew what they were going to ask us. So it was quite fun. After that, I made a short film called MoshKeKo A New Day. So my twins, we never cut their hair. And when I was younger, I was gifted with a teaching that when children go through the change or puberty, that a ceremony or a coming of age ceremony needs to be conducted. So that film, MoshKeKo, we returned to my home community of Attawapiskat, and the twins went into a sweat lodge ceremony for the first time, a cleansing ceremony on our ancestral lands. And they cut their hair for the first time. So, these are kind of stories that I like to delve into. These are my stories, so I feel I have the right to share these stories. Usually I consult with elders or knowledge keepers in community if it's a story that's not mine. I think that's necessary that we follow protocol, especially if we're covering stories that have to do with ceremony. I never bring the camera into ceremony like a sweat. That's just something that goes against my values. So I usually listen to my own gut feelings about certain things when I'm working on a film. Being a filmmaker means freedom of expression. It means delving into topics and issues that I don't necessarily see reflected on screen. I like the freedom of being a storyteller. I like being my own boss. When you're making documentary, it's different than narrative film or scripted, because when you're making a documentary film, you don't necessarily know what someone's going to say and you don't have control over what somebody's going to say. So you have to kind of be there, be present, pose questions if you're in an interview, be open as well in terms of where the subject or the person you're interviewing is taking you, because sometimes they'll take you on this whole other journey you did not expect to go on. So that's what I love about documentary film. I mean, I do other kinds of film. I do media installations, I do narrative, I write, I do tons of different things. As a documentary filmmaker, I think I have more freedom. There is so much power in storytelling. There's so much that you can do or say. It's just such a wonderful platform to explore. I think it's so important, especially what I've experienced as a young person and the discrimination my family experienced, all the barriers that we faced, the hurdles. I think it's so important to continue on even when you hear no. I'm a big dreamer. I spent lots of my young life in my imaginary world, creating worlds. I think it's so important to pursue what you love. We are gifted with life. We are all gifted with talents. And for me, it's my ability to tell stories. Following your heart is so important because, we're going to hear so many no's. I've heard so many no's in my lifetime. So many no's. Maybe because I'm stubborn, I found my way around those no's, or I found other ways of, getting what I want or achieving something. I think, you have to be flexible. You have to have a thick skin in this industry, meaning that sometimes people are not necessarily ready for the stories that you want to tell. For example, for the film that I just made, Kayameta, I think, people were not necessarily ready to engage with a film about menopause, about women's health. After we launched the film, I was actually quite surprised at how many people reached out and emailed me and shared their own stories. And like I said, I think story carries agency. Story brings us together. It has the power to change perspective. It has the power to bring people together, to gather, and to, make one feel like they're part of a community. So for me, creating film is a way for me to connect to others. It's a way for me to share what's important to me. I just think it's such a great platform to explore. And I think if I was going to give anybody a tip on documentary, get yourself a good phone. Phones today are wonderful. Sometimes they're even better than some of those fancy cameras. And some tips that I would have for some young filmmakers would be to go out, film some interviews, prepare some questions, think about topics that you want to explore. What's important to you? When I finished high school, I didn't have great grades. I had pretty bad grades actually, but somehow I got into the theater program at Concordia University. I talked my way into the program. I think I got into the program based on my audition, which was pretty great, I would say, but my marks were so bad. So I fought to get into the school, and I finally got accepted through admissions. And I moved to Montreal, and I really enjoyed university. I really enjoyed the theater program, and I would act in some of the student films, from the film department, and I would work on plays and stuff. I just really enjoyed storytelling and community and collaborations, like coming together and sharing stories. When I was in Montreal at Concordia, I was 19. It was great because at that time I was meeting other Indigenous artists. It was a year after the Oka crisis. There was so much resistance and resiliency, and it was just so great coming together with other Indigenous activists and protectors and artists, and I just felt so inspired. I remember being in Montreal, and I remember seeing my friend's mom film. She was a filmmaker, and she was a big documentary filmmaker, an Indigenous woman. And I remember seeing her work as a young person and being completely inspired. I was surprised that she didn't get in trouble. I don't know why. I was just kind of, amazed, because she was, the film was 270 Years of Resistance. She went behind the barricades. She actually went in and shared stories from people who were at the Oka crisis. So this film actually propelled me into documentary film. I've always liked documentary film. I've been a documentary nerd since I can remember, since I was young. So, it didn't surprise me that I ended up as a documentary filmmaker. But this one particular film was so interesting to me because, I'm used to, old National Film Board films where you have this didactic voice, the voice of God telling you what to think and feel. But that was replaced by the voice of an Indigenous woman, which I thought was really fascinating. Got me thinking about what kind of stories that I want to tell. And I thought it was so cool, and important to tell stories from an Indigenous perspective and tell stories that really matter to Indigenous people and communities. So that was my inspiration. And plus having my degree in theater, and I was doing a lot of plays from Indigenous playwrights, and and I was in Native Theatre School and did a lot of work in Toronto with the Native arts community there. So I've always been involved in the arts. I recommend venturing out into the community, introduce yourself, going to plays, going to film festivals, just getting yourself out there if you can. Also, it's important too to watch films, but I call it research. I'm always looking at different shots. I'm looking at the acting, like I'm reflecting on everything. I'm looking how, the cinematography is, the sound design. I'm, looking where they put the camera, if they're doing interviews, like what kinds of questions they're asking, just the different shots and the coloring, like everything. So I'm always doing my research. So if you're interested in film, just watch films and be really critical. Be critical of what you watch. What's the message behind the film? How's the directing? How's the acting? If it's a documentary, does it pose a question? Does every scene push the story forward? I would say, like, if you're interested in documentary, if this is something that you want to venture into, grab a camera, make sure your shots look really good, make sure there's a nice background. You know, I walked around the forest and made sure I try to find somewhere quiet. So try to find a quiet place, a nice scenic place. Make sure that when you're interviewing someone, you prepare questions and you have a centralized question. What I mean by that is when you're making a documentary, I think of it as an essay, but a visual essay. So you have a question that you want to get answered. And sometimes in documentary, we don't answer the question, but we're posing the question so that we're digging a little deeper and we're trying to delve into what the stories are about. When I do documentary, I prepare questions, like I said. I think of the locations. I think of who I want to interview, who's going to be interesting on screen. And then sometimes what I'll do is talk to them on the phone. So before I interview them on camera, I'll have a little mini interview with them on the phone or in person over coffee and tell them what my story idea is about. But I try not to lead them. I want them to kind of surprise me when we turn the cameras on. And I don't always necessarily stick to the questions that I write up. I try to be open that way because sometimes they go in this whole other direction that I didn't even think about that's worth kind of exploring. If you're a new filmmaker, maybe, start filming on your camera. If you want to make documentary, think of a topic that's interesting to you, something that you're passionate about. And don't overcomplicate things. You keep it simple. Think of a 2-minute documentary, then a 5-minute documentary, and then start producing work. I think it's really important too that, I always say this, I'm also an instructor, I teach at different universities, but I always tell my students, create work if you can every year, produce something new, try to create new work. And there's so many student film festivals out there. There's so many places that you could submit your work. If you're good with the camera, go out there and capture footage, like capture things that are happening in your community. Get footage that means something. When you're editing your film, make sure that you're pushing the story forward. Every scene is introducing a new idea or a new thought. I say get a lot of B-roll. Make sure you have tons and tons of footage, like landscape footage, forest. Here probably I'll go out and capture some shots of the trees so you kind of get a sense of where I am. That's B-roll. Yeah, do your homework, like do some preparing before. Prepare yourself for the shoot. If you have friends, gather your friends together. Maybe someone's really good with the camera and you're really good in front of the camera. Or if you're going to interview someone, make sure it's a nice quiet place. So those are kinds of things that I would get my students to do if they're going to venture on a new project or a new documentary film. In terms of a message, I think it's really important to follow your heart. Do what makes you feel happy. I think the worst thing is spending 40 to 50 hours on a job that you absolutely dislike. Time goes by super fast. And when you follow your passion, I think things fall into place as they should because you're doing something that you enjoy and that you love. Now I'm doing my PhD at UBC and I'm doing it on Indigenous documentary. I mean, it's something that's relevant to my arts practice and I enjoy the subject matter. So I think it's always important to enjoy what you're actually doing. I think as Indigenous people, especially if you're living in community, you're probably surrounded by amazing storytellers, probably gifted with the talent of telling stories. So that's probably in you already. So I think be honest with yourself. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You can totally think about it and take your time. Maybe what we enjoyed doing when we were 19, we may not enjoy when we're 30. So be open, and it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to find new hobbies, or things change in life. But I also say too, like, if there's one thing that you truly enjoy doing, put the effort in and invest in your craft. Take more courses, push your boundaries, do your homework. If you want to get good at something, practice makes perfect. If you have the talent already, that's amazing. If you want to get better at something, you continue doing it and you push yourself every single time with a new project. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope that I inspired you. I hope that you've learned something from me. I don't know if you have or not, but me as an artist, I had amazing mentors in my life. I had amazing people in my life who inspired me and who are still around that I reach out to today. So I think that really helps. So if there's people in your life that you want to learn from, or if there's a filmmaker that you know of, if you can reach out and ask them to mentor you, that always helps too, to have someone there to support you. I know that most of my mistakes, I wish I had someone to simplify things for me, but that wasn't always the case. I had to kind of stumble and find my way, which is fine too. So, Chi miigwech for your time, and thank you so much. And miigwech.